From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston. Welcome now to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. We heard last night from the wife of the presidential nominee. Tonight is the turn of the vice presidential nominee, Senator Kamala Harris. To go through where we are and where we're headed, we welcome now our Bloomberg political contributor. She is Jeannie Zaino of Iona College. So, Jeannie, great to be with you once again. Give us a sense of what we've seen so far and maybe even more important, what we have yet to see.
Yeah, I think last night Jill Biden did a good job of both introducing herself to many parts of the country that may not know her story, and I thought it was very effective at this time that she was in a school. She is an educator, Dr. Jill Biden, a teacher, and she was talking about some of the challenges of education in a COVID environment and also introducing the world to herself and to Joe Biden and their relationship. And I think that's important. You look at the polls, as long as Joe Biden has been in public office, people still don't have a good sense as to who he is. But I'm really looking forward to tonight because we do have, a really historic moment with the introduction and the nomination of Kamala Harris to be the vice presidential nominee. And, of course, we've got a lot of big, Democratic stars who are going to be speaking, including Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Elizabeth Warren, and Barack Obama. So I think this is going to be a really important night for the party to get an audience and to introduce Kamala Harris. I'm hoping we hear a little less attacks on the president and more about their governance strategy.
Well, and to that point, one of the things that strikes me is one thing we have not heard a peep about in this convention so far is the issue of law and order. President Trump's going to hit hard, and what's going on in some of our cities, including right here in New York. We've seen it in Chicago. We've seen it in Seattle. Kamala Harris is in a particular position to address that as a former prosecutor, how we can police our streets and still not abuse some of those less fortunate.
Absolutely, and this is something that I've heard from, particularly moderates and my more conservative friends who say, this is a glaring absence so far in these last couple of days is the fact that we all know this is going on in the country around us, and yet they've completely sort of neglected to address it. And you're right, Kamala Harris, a former prosecutor, the Attorney General from California. She is somebody who's taken a lot of fire in terms of her work as a prosecutor. She is well positioned to talk about how we move forward at a time you have substantial numbers in the Democratic Party calling for things like, defunding the police and things like that. How is the Democratic Party going to address that? Because certainly the president is out there addressing it. He was at the border yesterday, and security is a major focus of the Republicans this year.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Okay, thank you so much to Jeannie Zaino. Always great to have you with us. She's our Bloomberg political contributor. She'll be back with us tonight for our special convention coverage. One of the stark differences between President Obama and former Vice President Joe Biden is their approach to energy. With Mr. Biden putting forth an ambitious, some might even say aggressive plan to spend $2 trillion over 4 years and to take us entirely out of emissions when we're generating electrical energy for the country by 2035. Welcome now someone who has advised the Biden campaign on energy. He's Mike Garland, CEO of Pattern Energy, a renewable energy firm. So thanks so much, Mike, for being with us. Give us a sense of whether this is really doable. 2035 is not that far away. Can we really get to the world where we have zero emissions in generating electricity in this country by then?
Well, it's a challenge, but it is doable. I revert back to 2009 when we were in a similar circumstances as we are now, and they kickstarted and supported the renewable industry, and we grew at about $40 billion investment in 2009 and 20 gigawatts of new renewable power. And so while it's an ambitious plan, the industry is well positioned because of our infrastructure already available to expand and grow quickly. And I think it's viewed as part of the kickstarting of the economy that we can get going quickly and starting to make investments in hiring people and build projects relatively fast. And so I think in the 4-year period, it would take a big ramping up, but I think the capacity within the United States and some external deliveries would allow us to get there.
So, Mike, provided we can find the money, and $2 trillion is a lot of money, saying yes to people isn't so hard, creating jobs isn't so hard, investing in infrastructure isn't so hard. Could we get to this ambitious goal without saying no to some people? And saying that, I'm thinking about things like fracking. Do we need to ban or cut back on fracking? What about the oil depletion allowance? Should we be adjusting the tax rate so that we are not subsidizing oil and gas in order to make this goal?
No, it's an excellent question because And when I was head of the Wind Energy Association in, I think it was 2015, we proposed a phase out of tax credits for the renewable industry based on the assumption that everybody would lose their tax benefits. And that has not happened. The fracking industry, the oil and gas industry, the coal industry all have substantial subsidies. If you look at the subsidies since 1950, wind and solar has only received about 7% of the federal incentives for energy. And so, the fossil fuel industry in 2015 and 16, the last numbers I have that are pretty sound, got about $15 billion, and they've, since World War II, have been given $600 billion of tax benefits. And so it has distorted the market. We, over time, believe that even now, tax credits are not that needed. That what they will do is allow us to kickstart and get more done quickly than we need, than we would otherwise. Wind and solar are clearly the lowest cost new power supply almost anywhere in the world now, whether it's subsidized or not. And so the idea that fossil fuel industries is still receiving subsidies is unfortunate and is really perverting the market. The mechanics of the marketplace to incentivize people to continue doing those kind of resources, developing and selling those resources.
Mike, as you know particularly well, there are some big and powerful interests that align behind some of that fossil fuel business. Cutting back on those subsidies or eliminating could really have some effects, both on some very big companies, but also on some political issues. I mean, for example, cutting back on fracking could affect Pennsylvania, a key battleground state. Do you have a sense that Joe Biden and his campaign are willing to break those kinds of eggs?
Well, certainly I think they're willing to break those eggs. But the thing about Joe Biden is he really cares for the working man and woman, the working men and women of this country. And he's not going to let jobs be distorted and not, lost in those industries and ignored. He's going to take actions to support the labor and the business leaders in those communities that are affected by retraining programs. We're certainly very supportive of going into those coal countries and retraining people and getting them to what we consider better paid, better quality jobs. And so if you couple both the hard decisions and the ones that you need to do to help transition people into the new clean economy, you'll get their support, and it won't be as tough a decision to make on cutting that part of the industry out.
Mike, what would the Biden energy plan do for oil exports for the United States, and what might that do to the economy?
The oil exports will transition over time. If you look at, I was lucky enough to be invited as part of the CEO's conference at the Vatican, where all the oil and gas and large investment companies were invited to the Vatican to talk about these issues. And you've seen a huge transition in the oil companies already. Shell was terrific in some of the statements they were making. You saw recently that British Petroleum, BP, has now announced they're making a transition. So I don't think the Biden administration, my impression isn't they're looking to shut down the pipes immediately. They understand there's going to be a transition. They don't want to lose some of that economic value of exporting oil and gas, but it's going to be a transition that over time they're going to have to change. And I think the oil companies know it, and they're going to stand behind that effort. It's just a question of timing, not a question of if.
Okay, Mike, great to have you with us as always. That's Mike Garland. He's CEO of Pattern Energy. Coming up here, Cass Sunstein, Bloomberg opinion columnist and Harvard law professor, has a new proposal for a commission on voting integrity as we head toward the November election. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David West, and it's time now for First Word News. And for that, we go to Marc Crumpton.
David, thank you. Democrats have, in fact, made it official. They've nominated Joe Biden to take on President Trump in November. Biden received the more than 2,300 delegates needed in a virtual roll call that was a video tour across the nation. Former President Bill Clinton and New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez made short appearances. So did former Republican Secretary of State and former Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Colin Powell.
Joe Biden will be a president we will all be proud to salute. With Joe Biden in the White House, you will never doubt that he will stand with our friends and stand up to our adversaries, never the other way around.
Tonight, Democrats will hear from Biden's running mate, California Senator Kamala Harris. The president of Belarus is warning the European Union not to interfere in his country's post-election crisis. Alexander Lukashenko says the West should focus on its own problems. EU leaders are holding an emergency conference call today to discuss the brutal crackdown on opposition protests that erupted after Lukashenko claimed a landslide victory in the August 9th election. Hundreds of thousands of people have taken to the streets in the capital, Minsk, to demand that Lukashenko resign. London's busiest airport unveiled a new coronavirus testing facility site today. Heathrow says it could cut in half the time people have to quarantine after arriving from countries where COVID-19 is spreading. More than 100 countries are on that list, including France, Spain, and the United States. Heathrow says more than 13,000 tests will be available each day, and the results will be ready within hours. There are some encouraging signs out of Florida. The state says the number of new cases edged up just 0.7% today, and the positivity rate dropped to its lowest level since June. Florida has had more than 384,000 COVID-19 cases since the pandemic began. Nearly 10,000 people have died. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Marc Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thank you so much, Marc. We had some breaking news, but I'm not sure what it was there. Okay, one thing Republicans and Democrats seem to agree on is that the election this year will be one of the most disputed in history, with issues ranging from mail-in votings to voter suppression to how to have a vote in the middle of a coronavirus. Here to talk about the important question of the integrity of voting in the United States is Harvard Law Professor Cass Sunstein, who also, I'm happy to say, is a Bloomberg opinion columnist and has a new proposal out on this. So, Cass, welcome. On top of everything I just mentioned, we also have a new Intelligence Committee report out saying that indeed the Russians did, going all the way up to President Putin himself, try to interfere with the 2016 election. You now have a brand new proposal about a commission. What is it?
Well, what we really need in this country now is a commission on electoral integrity. We have a commission on product safety, and we have a commission on consumer financial protection to protect voters and our fundamental right to self-government. We require an institution that's actually capable of executing on that task.
And so what would be the point of this commission? What would be the output of it? How could it actually reform what we're doing?
Okay, you would have one job, unlike many commissions, which have 12 or 30. The one job would be to minimize or eliminate foreign interference with our election. And its minimal task would be to do semi-annual reports, both to Congress and the president and to the American people, to the extent it's not classified, about what's happening. It would also have the authority, actually be directed to make recommendations to Congress and the president about how to respond. And it should also have rulemaking authority consistent with the First Amendment to try to ensure, let's say, appropriate restrictions on uses of social media, for example, by countries that are intending to interfere with our electoral process. And Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook has actually called for exactly that. So those who are worried, as we all should be, about excessive regulation should note that social media platforms are themselves calling for this kind of help.
So, Cass, we have the issue of attempts, at least, by foreign governments to interfere with elections. We also have a number of issues, as I mentioned, coming up to this election. And I've talked to both Democrats and Republicans saying there's going to be more litigation over this election than any other in history. How do you assess those risks, and what can we do to confine them?
Okay, so they're serious, and I think we have to go one by one. So there's the foreign interference risk, where we need the apparatus of the federal government to be checking what's happening, and we need social media platforms to be cooperating. There's the risk of mail-in ballots. Actually, the real risk is they won't be counted because of the slowness of the mail. There's a very, very small risk of fraud and error, and both have to be corrected. The number one priority is to make sure that every vote counts. Doesn't matter who the vote's for, but if someone mails in a ballot at an appropriate time, it has to be counted. That's one. With respect to other risks about coronavirus, et cetera, there are ways of handling that by making it easy for people to vote without going out in crowds, and that has to be handled as well. This is primarily state responsibility. It's something that should be kind of, all hands on deck to make sure that the vote is full and fair. It would not be a good thing if litigation ends up helping to determine the outcome of the presidential election.
So, Cass, all elections have consequences, they say, but typically those involve policies and people implementing policies. You have a column out actually suggesting there might be a larger issue at stake here, and that is the very structure of our government, and specifically the role of our so-called independent agencies, something you know terribly well because under the Obama administration you served as the head of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. Give us a sense of what really might be at stake when it comes to the regulatory authorities and the difference between a Biden administration and a Trump administration.
So this is technical, but really important. So some agencies, like if they have department in their title, like the Department of Agriculture, they're really controlled by the president, and that's appropriate. So the Department of Transportation, the head is an at-will employee of the president. That's also true of the Department of Justice. There are other entities like the Federal Communications Commission and the Federal Reserve Board, which have a degree of independence from the president, meaning the president can't control their policy-making operations. And that's also really important because a president who's determined, to skew things in his favor could control the Fed, not to promote the long-term health of the economy, but to promote the short-term popularity of the White House. That wouldn't be good. The Federal Communications Commission, which regulates our communication sector, of course, has to be outside of political hands, and it has been. The independent agencies are now in serious constitutional jeopardy. There's a view, which is gaining traction on the Supreme Court, that they are constitutionally a barnacle, meaning they have to be removed. And that's held in good faith by some people, but it would wreak havoc with our apparatus of government, would take immensely important parts of the government, whether you love how they're acting or not, and it would put them squarely in the political domain of the president. That's more likely to happen under President Trump than under President Biden. O'Biden, he is Irish, but his name is not O'Biden. Under President Biden, the independence of the independent agencies is more likely to be respected, both by his own practice and also by the practice of the judges that he would appoint.
So, Cass, let's be sort of very direct about this. If I'm running a company that's regulated by the NLRB, by the SEC, by the FTC, any of these agencies, am I happy or am I sad if those agencies are directly under the political control of the president?
I think other things being equal, you don't want it under the president's direct control. And it's a little more complicated than that, but you don't want the political apparatus of the White House to be in charge of what happens to you if you're controlled by the Securities and Exchange Commission or the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It's too dangerous that your own political affiliation and whether the White House likes you or not is going to get caught up in the regulatory practice. So a kind of space between politics and the agency is basically in your favor. Now, there are other cases where it could run the other way. If, for example, you have very good relations with the White House, you might hope that you can press the agency in your favor. But from the standpoint of the American people, with respect to, let's say, action against a nuclear company that has nuclear power, we don't want that to turn on political considerations.
Cass, it's always such a treat to have you with us. I'm delighted to say Cass Sunstein, professor of law at Harvard, will be remaining with us for the second hour of Balance of Power as well over on Bloomberg Radio. Still ahead, Big news in retail. We have big earnings out, and what does it tell us really about the economy this day as we are 87 days away from the election? This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. Polls show that Republicans tend to see the economy as having bounced back, but the Democrats are very much in doubt. This week, we got some big retail companies' earnings that may give us some light on the answer to the question of which it is. Abigail Doolittle is here with a report on the retail sector, a whole sector, not just a stock of the hour.
Well, you know, David, it's interesting here because we have mixed messages coming from retail, so it's not clear whether the economy is bouncing back and will stay bounced back, or if we have a near-term blip. Now, relative to individual earnings movers, it's really a story between haves and have-nots. Target and Lowe's both put up big blowout quarters, really aided by stay-at-home trends, with folks really stocking up on goods from Target, improving their home from Lowe's. On the other hand, TJ Maxx, the treasure hunt, David, seems to have ended. They initially were doing very well out of lockdown, but it seems as though in the current quarter, they see sales maybe dropping 20%. Ross Stores, they report tomorrow. So the discretionary spending, which could really help, the economy power higher, it seems to be faltering right now. So again, it's a little bit unclear.
So, Abigail, apart from individual company earnings, what about retail sales overall? Aren't they back to where they were before the big downturn?
They are. And so this is another interesting piece here. It's just such a bumpy year relative to retail sales. Now, when the shutdown initially started, retail sales in the U.S. on a month-over-month basis absolutely plunged in the month of April, down about 15%. And then there was a very sharp snapback in May, up about 18%. In July, up 1.2%, missing the estimate for up 2.1%. So a little bit of a disappointment there. But as you mentioned, they're kind of back to where they used to be. But the big question is, will that continue? Will consumers go out and shop? And a lot of that's going to have to do with the virus and also whether or not the stimulus gets passed. If folks feel uncertain, they're probably going to kind of try to save money as opposed to spend it, especially on discretionary items.
An interesting fall ahead of us. Thank you so much to Abigail Doolittle for that report. Coming up next, we talk to Ohio Congresswoman Joyce Beatty of Ohio about night 3 of the Democratic Convention and Kamala Harris. This is Bloomberg. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and radio. I'm David Weston. Tonight is night 3 of the Democratic Convention, and we are going to hear from the vice presidential nominee. She is Senator Kamala Harris. To talk about that, we welcome now back to Bloomberg Democratic Congresswoman from Ohio, Joyce Beatty. She's a member of the House Financial Services Committee as well as the Joint Economic Committee. So, Congresswoman, thank you for coming back. Good to have you here. Tell us what you know of Kamala Harris. Tell us what you think of this nomination.
Well, first of all, let me just say thank you for having me on your show. I am as excited as I am sure many are about Kamala being our vice presidential candidate, and we'll hear from her tonight. I know her. I serve in Congress. She serves in the Senate. She's a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. I've traveled with her. I was at John Lewis's funeral with her. I can tell you that she is strong, she is smart, she's strategic. And if I were Vice President Pence, I would not want to be debating her. She has lived a life of success. She has done things against the odds. So I think her life has prepared her for what we're going to see on this campaign trail and when she wins in November with Joe Biden.
Congresswoman, mindful of her life story, there are two things that stand out for me. She is, of course, the first African-American woman as well as Asian-American woman to be nominated for vice president. At the same time, she spent a long time as a prosecutor, first in San Francisco and then as the California Attorney General. At a time right now when there are cities really in uproar, and at one point we talked with you about your city of Columbus, Ohio being in trouble. What do we expect to hear from Kamala Harris on that subject, how we police our streets, keep people safe without abusing a certain class of the society?
I think what she'll say is you have to look at what era and time and what you're doing. We've gone through this as we reflect back on history. There was a time when, unfortunately, we had 3 strikes and you're out. There was a time when African Americans were being prosecuted, and we looked at it because they were being prosecuted disproportionately. None of that has changed today. You know, people die with COVID-19, and there are disparities, and we're affected disproportionately. We make up 13% of the nation, and yet our dying rate from COVID is 24%. So I think what she did in the past, at that time, she was still fighting to make a difference to save families. I think also you have to look at when she was coming up, women were told they could not be district attorneys. That was something that was not in the realm for you being a female, let alone a black female, as she self-identifies herself as her mother sent 2 little black children to school and taught them they could do whatever they wanted to do. And certainly her heritage of being Indian American and her father being from Jamaica brings a lot of diversity to the table. And I think we will hear about that. We'll hear about her upbringing, how when her mother became a single mother and she raised those 2 children, when her mother was a chemist. And so her feel for healthcare and fighting for us during this pandemic we have right now. She has so many things that she can use from the past and turn around. She has never ran from her past and what she did and why she did it. And it was all in the spirit of building families and helping those children be able to have a brighter future. Now, knowing that she's running for a vice presidential candidate, would she have done things differently? I'm not so sure. But I think what's most important is where she is now. And look at what she has been doing since she's been in the Senate. Look at her leadership and management when you think about her running the largest law practice, basically, in the country. I mean, it was the state of California. So I think that tonight we're going to be proud, we're going to be pleased, and she's going to speak truth to power. She has never ran from that. And here's another thing. There will be an army of people watching her, the traditional, the non-traditional, but she also went to an HBCU, a historically black college and university, Howard University. So you will have individuals from her university, from other HBCUs. She's a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, a black sorority. Right. You will hear it, you will have people from all 9 of the black sororities and fraternities rooting her on and cheering for her. And so I think that's a large army to reckon with.
And Congresswoman, obviously the purpose of this convention is to get the 2 nominees and then to have the race and to win, you hope, the Democrats in November. Give us a sense of your home state of Ohio, because there was a time not long ago that it seemed to really be the battleground state. It seems to have moved into the red column at this point. How is it going to handle 2020?
Well, you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, we've gone from blue to red, and now we might be considered purple. We're a toss-up state now. And I think the excitement and energizing people, if we get the vote out, I think we will be saying again that Ohio is one of those states that you can't count out. And I think we're starting to see that. That's why we're fighting so hard against this president and the administration trying to deter folks from being able to use the postal services to request their ballots and to get them back in time. I think that's all of a part of this administration being desperate because we know with the Biden-Harris ticket, it's going to generate so much excitement for people to come out. And still across this country, more women vote. This is the 100th year of the 19th Amendment. So we have so much going for us now. We have white women and brown and yellow women holding up signs saying Black Lives Matter. We have people reflecting on what it must have felt like to have someone have their knee on your neck, literally for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, but figuratively When we talk about this race and having a knee on our neck, we know how hard it was for us to get the right to vote as minorities and as women, black, white, and brown. So I think all of that's going to work for us in Ohio.
Well, Congressman, we can certainly hear the passion in your voice. Thank you so much for being with us. That's Democratic Congresswoman from Ohio. She is Joyce Beatty. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Marc Crumpton.
As you and Congresswoman Beatty just alluded to, Kamala Harris will make history tonight when she becomes the first black woman to accept a major party's nomination for vice president. We'll have more on that coming up in just a few minutes. President Trump raising questions about the future of that trade deal with China. The president says that he called off last weekend's talks with Beijing. He said he doesn't want to talk to China right now. The president called China's handling of the coronavirus, quoting here, unthinkable. The Trump administration sees a path to a pared-down $500 billion stimulus deal. Bloomberg's learned the package would eliminate the biggest areas of disagreement between Republicans and Democrats. It would include financial help for the Postal Service, aid to schools, and money for businesses to keep their workers employed. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi suggested Democrats might also agree to a smaller deal. No end to the violence in Portland, Oregon. Police once again declared a riot last night after demonstrators broke the windows of a county government building and set a fire inside. That fire damaged the lobby where Oregon's first gay marriage ceremony took place in 2004. The demonstrations have gripped Oregon's biggest city for nearly 3 months since George Floyd died in police custody in Minneapolis. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg. Powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Marc Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks so much, Marc. Coming up, how would a President Biden act as a leader? We talk with someone who served with him in the Obama administration. He's former Secretary of Homeland Security, Jeh Johnson. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. The theme of last night's Democratic convention was leadership, and I spoke with someone who has led at the highest levels of our government, first as General Counsel of the Pentagon and then as Secretary of Homeland Security, Jeh Johnson. One of the things I asked him about was how a vice president led when he was vice president, because they did serve together.
When I was in office, I made a point of having within my inner circle, within the Department of Homeland Security, people who I knew were going to give me the in-house company line, and people whose views very often mirrored that of the larger public. For example, on any immigration issue, I'd have the pro-enforcement types from ICE, from CBP, but I also wanted to have around the table people who represented the views of immigration reformists, the activists, those outside the Department of Homeland Security. And when you get a range of divergent views, that is the environment for healthy government decision-making. When I was at the Pentagon as the General Counsel of the Department of Defense, evaluating the legality of a counterterrorism operation, if everybody around my table nodded their head, yes, good to go, good to go, good to go, I'd say, well, wait a minute, come on, this is a very, very serious operation we're contemplating here. We need to have more legal discussion here. Is anybody here willing to be the skeptic? And out of those types of deliberations, I believe you get the best decision making. Too often, a president only hears what people think he wants to hear and not what he needs to hear. And that is a dangerous environment.
Leaders in large organizations also have a challenge often of the urgent driving out the important. You deal with the thing coming across your desk every day because it's there and it needs an answer, but you then don't deal with some of the more important issues. When it comes to national security, to Homeland Security, what are the, if I can put it this way, existential questions, the one we cannot afford to get wrong?
Well, first, any major, what we cannot afford to get wrong, any risk of an attack, any attack that is of high consequence. Some are higher probability, some are lesser probability, but you have to keep your eye on all of it. This is one of the reasons, David, I keep talking about climate change, global warming. It is not always at the top of the inbox in terms of a crisis that a president or a Secretary of Homeland Security or a Secretary of Defense has to deal with. It is, as I think Barack Obama once put it, a slow motion emergency that tends to exist in the inbox, but not always at the top of the inbox, which is why it is so important for people in office, particularly in national security, who are dealing day to day with one crisis or another, multiple crises in a week, to keep in mind the longer term challenges we have to our homeland security, to our public safety, to our national security, and don't lose sight of those. To me, a good day in office was when most of the meetings on my calendar were meetings that I requested to address longer term issues versus the meetings that were thrust upon me to deal with the shorter term crises.
You served with Vice President Biden, so you got to see him in action. Give us your synopsis of him as a leader.
I believe Joe Biden is a consensus builder. I know from many discussions with him that he believes that in order to get stuff done, you have to work with people on both sides of the aisle. He did that for 36 years in the Senate. I believe he will continue that style if elected. And I actually believe that's the correct approach. That's how I tried to operate when I was in Washington as a cabinet official and as a Defense Department official. You have to work with people across the aisle in order to get stuff done. Unless you happen to have a supermajority in Congress of your party, you just simply have to work to build consensus among people across the aisle and remind everyone that we were elected here to do the people's work, not to just play politics. And I think that's the essence of how Senator Biden and then Vice President Biden led and governed while he was in office.
Are true leaders born or built?
That's a good question. True leaders are those who learn from the examples of others, but not necessarily emulate others. I've had the advantage of observing other really fantastic leaders. For example, Robert Gates as Secretary of Defense when I was his general counsel. But at the end of the day, a lot of military leaders will tell you that leadership is being the best version of yourself. Bring your own style to office, the best version of yourself. And at the end of the day, after getting a lot of good advice, you're left with only your own instincts about how to govern and how to make decisions. And so, to a very large extent, it is innate. You have to have the confidence of your decision making, and that's not something you necessarily are taught. So I think it's a combination of both.
That was part of my conversation with Jay Johnson, former Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. Coming up here, we're going to talk with the president of the National Urban League, Marc Morial, about a brand new lawsuit he announced today against the Trump administration in its management of the Postal Service. That's coming up on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. The U.S. Postal Service has become ground zero in a battle over how we're going to get to vote this fall. It started with President Trump repeatedly condemning what he calls universal mail-in voting, and then his head of the Postal Service, Mr. DeJoy, decided to cut back on some of their operations, which caused a furor. Mr. DeJoy backed off on that yesterday because he said that we had to wait until after the election. In the meantime, today, there was a lawsuit filed with the National Urban League, and we're joined now by the president of that organization. He is Mr. Marc Morial. So, Marc, thank you so much for being with us. A big day. Tell us about this lawsuit. What is it about? Why'd you file it?
David, thank you very much. And we have joined with the League of Women Voters in Common Cause as co-plaintiffs, represented by the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights and the Washington, D.C.-based law firm of Arnold and Porter, to challenge the actions of Louis DeJoy, the unprecedented actions to politicize the Postal Service. This is a sad day in American history when the president, reaching down through one of his political appointees, seeks to completely undermine the system of voting. There may be 7 states in the United States where the voters in those states primarily rely on vote by mail. Vote by mail is relied on by many rural voters, relied on by many older voters, relied on to people who may be working on election day. And in the environment of COVID, vote by mail becomes a safe option for people who may not feel like they want to go to a polling place, either during the early voting period or on election day. So if we challenge Louis DeJoy, and we challenge him by saying he's not followed Postal Service guidelines, rules, and regulations, number one. Number two, his actions have a chilling effect on every American's right to vote. And Americans have to stand up. This smacks of what happens in countries that we're better than, that somehow a person who has power can interfere with the elections process because somehow they feel that they're disadvantaged politically by this elections process. So we're asking the federal courts to intervene. What's happened? Number one, mailboxes have been pulled up. Number two, sorting machines that sort as many as 20 million pieces of mail per minute have been taken out of many postal operation centers. Number three, overtime has been cut back. Employees have been furloughed, pushed out, or laid off. It's clearly an effort right now when many Americans have great anxiety, great concerns about their health, but want to vote in this election, an effort to make it more difficult for Americans to vote. So we want the courts to intervene, but we want the people to speak out.
So, Marc, I take your point, but haven't you already won this lawsuit before you even filed it? Because, as I say, Mr. DeJoy used to say, okay, fine, we won't make any changes until after the election. Why doesn't that take care of the problem from your point of view?
Because damage has already been done. Taking mailboxes out of rural areas and urban communities, that does damage. It's got to be a return to the status quo. Those mailboxes need to be put back exactly where they've been, number one. Those sorting machines need to be put back into place at every postal operations center. The hiring freeze needs to be discontinued so that there is sufficient personnel to do what they need to do. Look, postal employees know how to do this work. They do it every single day. They deliver thousands of packages, millions and millions of packages, I should say, and pieces of mail to Americans. They deliver credit cards, they deliver checks, they deliver invoices, they deliver greeting cards, they deliver birthday cards, they deliver valuable medicine. They deliver things every day. They know how to do this, but the process is being interfered in for political reasons.
Okay, so Marc, you said let's go back to the status quo. Is that going to be good enough? That is to say, does the Postal Service have the resources it needs if we really have a huge deluge of mail-in votes, because a lot of people are predicting it's going to be several times what we've seen in the past? Or does it have to be something the courts can't give you, which is billions of dollars appropriated to help the Postal Service on an emergency basis?
I think what the courts can do is order the government and order the Postal Service to ensure that every ballot that is properly placed in either a post box or or brought to the postal station or brought to the mail put in a mailbox, I should say, or brought to a postal office, finds its way safely, securely, and on a timely basis to its destination, which is an elections headquarters or a registration station or wherever the ballots are counted. This is what the courts can order the United States government to do and order the Postal Service to do. And the Postal Service can figure it out. Look, right now, Congress is debating a new COVID bill. And that new COVID bill could easily include sufficient funds to allow for mail-in ballots to be delivered on a timely, a safe, and a secure basis and give them more than the money they need. Right. What's more important than American democracy.
Marc, just to sneak in here just a second. Time's a wasting because a lot of these ballots are going to be submitted in the not too far distant future. Have you asked for expedited relief?
We've asked for summary relief, expedited relief, an injunction against the Postal Service. And so it's our hope that the courts will take this matter up fairly quickly.
Yeah, it's fascinating. There's going to be a lot of dispute, a lot of litigation going on.
And I expect many more lawsuits. I mean, we have filed one. I expect many states to file. I expect many, many local jurisdictions and voters to file. This is unprecedented. We are in a health emergency right now, and Americans need to be ensured of their right to vote.
It's a really important point. A lot of people on both sides of the aisle say this could be the most litigated election in history. Thank you so much to Marc Morial. He's National Urban League President and CEO. Coming up, Balance of Power will continue for a second hour on Bloomberg Radio. And tonight we will have coverage once again of night 3 of the Democratic National Convention. That starts at 10 o'clock Eastern Time. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Radio and Television.